I think the right way to come at the problem of religiosity is to first begin with the way that people think about psychology. See, I think we have a tendency to take certain aspects of our lives and call them wholly subjective or personal or individual. And I'm just going to begin with something like memory. Okay, so if you take something like memory, people have a tendency to call memory subjective, or they'll say it's private or individual. And I think we know what they mean, right? That is, if you have 10 or 15 people and they go to an event or a party, whatever it is, and then you ask them about it a year later or even a couple of weeks later, you will get somewhat of different responses. And in there, people will say, look, can't you see memory is subjective, it's something personal. But I think we're really glossing over something, that there is something like a collectively available remembrance of what occurred. And it's not to argue that memory gives objective access to the facts as they are. No, the point would be something larger, which is when we say that memory is just psychological, we miss the degree to which nature itself evolved certain kinds of ways of relating to its own past, and that's what we call memory, right? We call memory a certain evolved capacity in nature for nature to open to its own past in certain ways. Now, whether or not it's constructive, the degree to which it's constructive, we can haggle about that. But I think if we want to be serious and think about it, from my perspective, in a right way, we have to acknowledge the degree to which nature is opened to, we'll call it possible pasts or kinds of pasts that wouldn't be there without brains that have those memory capacities. And so, although the brains and the memories are, quotes, inside us, it's nature itself has evolved this capacity. And I think once we come at memory in that way and we start to see memory as a larger natural phenomena having to do with time and the way that time can open to itself, then I think we're able to raise this question about what is God talk? And could it be that God is a feeling? That the divine, I mean that animism and superstition, and there's certain kinds of feelings that became, I guess, concretized in the advent of various forms of polytheism. But the modern monotheistic notion, and again, I mean the very modern one, could it be that, again, that God is a feeling? Rather than trying to get at God as a creator or God as a judger or doer. See, now, judger gets in there because it's related to the feelings that come with the problem of self relation. We'll get to that in a second. But it seems as if, and it seems as if, that instead of dealing with, a guy who is a creator or some being who stands outside of existence and will render judgments and will uh, give sentences to people and heaven and hell and virgin births and all the other stuff. But instead, you say nature evolved various kinds of feeling, and pain and suffering are, they're one horizon, pleasure and gratification are another. They're what might be called a kind of thought prior to thought. That is, they're a register of valuative load, but they're still somewhat inarticulate in what they disclose, right? There is a bearing of going toward or going against, right? In the same way that I can give an admonishment to go toward or to, stay away from. Talk about suffering seems, again, very different than suffering, in the same way that all the talk about pleasure is very different than actually experiencing it. I think, again, we could get to this same sense with God. To what extent is God a feeling? To what extent is organized religion, with all of its talk about faith and beliefs and dogma, is that all hiding from the fact that there are some people who actually have experiences of the feeling of God? And when I say the feeling of God, I don't mean like a guy and who talks, who does all this stuff. I mean, it's a feeling of love and compassion, and it has a complex mix of beauty and horror, and it's, I think, again, it can move one to tears. It's utterly, utterly both beautiful and painful and elevating and humbling at the same time, about ultimate compassion and love. And that feeling has become possible through, again, a kind of neurophysiological evolved complexity in an organism that's finding a way to relate to itself in time, but to the larger world, to its own most possibilities, to possible futures. I think, you know, when I say I love another person, and you do this romantic kind of love, you think of one person loving another, and there it becomes a kind of fetishization where you end up, you give privileged of treatment to this person over other people. But when you start to move toward a notion of God as love and God as the feeling of love, it moves beyond a person. It moves toward the actual love of life itself. That is, it's as if the sophistication of our brains, which can entertain ultimate abstractions like the cosmos of, of all that is, like, just for an example, as a side point, I sometimes hear talk about the cosmos being infinitely expanding. I say, well, the universe is infinitely expanding. Then you can ask, well, if it's infinitely expanding, what's it expanding into? And then people will say nothing. Well, does that mean that the nothing is expanding too? Well, I guess no, that doesn't make any sense. See, right? But at any rate, we can circle around in our thought about these questions of ultimates. I mean, people actually do. People actually want to know what started it all. Where did it all come from? And when they have this, where did it all come from? It's as if thought moves in a direction and then just hits this amorphous fog when it reaches the limits of its ability to just entertain it. But that same sense of dealing with ultimate abstraction, when coupled with the feelings that humans are capable of, the whole range of them, and the ability to balance contradictory emotions and then harmonize them in some way, to see the comedy tragedy of life in a single instant, and to cry while laughing, and to feel it in its beautiful radiance. I think the more that people could move toward a discussion of, could God be a feeling? And could feelings be more than simply subjective and psychological? That is, aren't feelings and psychological states, as much as they are subjective, and we don't want to miss that and deny that, aren't they a disclosure of something about one of the possibilities that this world has evolved for relating to itself? Okay, thanks.